Hello, this is Professor David Bishai, and I'm speaking to you from Baltimore, Maryland in the U.S., where we're starting our course on an introduction to vaccine economics for COVID-19. Welcome all of you to this course. It's so timely, and I'm so glad that you're here. Let me start this first session by outlining what we'll achieve over the course of this lecture. The first thing we'll do is to examine the goals of this course overall and what would be expected of students in the course. In the second section, Section B, we'll go over the vaccine supply landscape for COVID-19. Then we'll move on to discuss the COVID-19 demand landscape, and then finally wrap up with how we want to address the problems of COVID-19 supply and demand with the principles in this course. So let me dive right into Section A and share with you our goals for this course. The goals are listed here on the slide. Our first goal is to depict the choices that have to be made in order to combat the coronavirus pandemic with COVID-19 vaccine. We're really focusing on the choices that countries will face. High-income countries and low-income countries have to trade off priorities, and we believe that economics is a useful tool in making these trade-offs. And our goal would be to lay them out and give you the tools to understand those choices to make informed decisions. We're going to use quantification of these choices. We're going to quantify the costs of making the various choices in strategies in getting the world vaccinated. We're going to depict the various types of benefit that would accompany each and every choice. We want our students to immediately apply the new skills. There's no time to waste. This is a crisis, and we need to be ready to hit the ground running. And so we really want to apply our knowledge immediately. So the rationale is quite straightforward. What we're offering in economics is a science that for all of its existence has been able to help benefit human beings who are making choices. And we do this using data and quantification. We want to inform the choices with as many observations as we can, and then find out what we don't know right now so that we can grab that data and inform our choices in the future. There really is no time to lose. So the first goal, these critical choices, we will build up the elements of economics as a science of choice. And when we do that, when we establish what is a science of choice, we have some foundations and fundamental elements that we have to have. In order for there to be a science of choice, those who are doing the choosing have to have a goal. It has to be a coherent and stable goal. We can't do this if we can't understand the goal or if the goal keeps changing every other week. Then we have to have a coherent and shared understanding of the consequences. Those who share the problem have to share their understanding of what happens from their choices. If they don't agree on a shared model and a shared understanding of the problem, then we basically have what we call a Tower of Babel, where they can't communicate and can't understand and can't take collective action. In this science of choice, then, there are going to be opportunity costs, meaning you can't do two things at once. Doing X means you can't do Y. And final principle is that there's uncertainty, that we just don't know everything we want to know, and we have to take action under uncertainty. We think that cost-effectiveness principles that can be applied can help us, but we're very concerned to help our students understand that context matters. What is cost-effective in one context will not be cost-effective everywhere. So we have to understand what the contextual limitations of cost-effectiveness principles are. We have choices in vaccine supply and choices in vaccine demand. We have global choices in how the firms are going to discover and produce and distribute the vaccines. We have global decisions to make now about how to do this fairly. We have global threats to the fairness of the vaccine supply stocks. At a national level, we have choices in terms of who is going to bear the costs of supplying the vaccines. Nations have to make allocation decisions and set priorities over the groups that will receive the doses of vaccine, because this will be a scarce vaccine for the short term when it first comes out. Hopefully, after several months, there will be enough vaccine for everybody, but we know there won't be enough in the first several months of the release. We want to have nations make choices that are fair according to locally understood principles of fairness, as well as appeals to global ethical principles. On the demand side, we know that customers face costs even when there's a free vaccine. And customers face complex incentives that are so much more difficult than just paying money in order to get a consumer product. There is fear, there's uncertainty, there's social cohesion, stigma. All of these things are going on the demand side, and we want economics to help us understand that. So in terms of applying a science of choice, as I said earlier, one cannot make a choice if one does not have a goal. Without a goal, can't get it done. Furthermore, we are having to make collective choices, so we need collective goals. And these collective goals are definitely going to conflict with somebody's own personal costs and the need to make personal sacrifice. They're going to ask the question, why do I have to sacrifice? Why do I have to give up my rights and privileges in order for the collective choice? There's only one way forward, which is to get coherence around the goals. We have to state what we want. We want a world without COVID-19 disease. How do we get there? What is the coherent understanding? So the second principle here, we have to share our understanding of consequences. When we are making choices, people have to share their understanding of how the choices lead to the goal. Now, people all have mental models. I do, you do. Everybody has a mental set of assumptions about the chain between what we do today and what happens tomorrow. And mathematical models are simply a little bit more formalized, written down models of how the world works. We can inform those mathematical models with evidence, and we can share it for public discussion. Now, we all know that models have their limitations and they can be pushed too far. We want to know when the model is wrong and where its limits are. But we have to share those models with each other. We have to be fluent in what they mean so that we can share them to get the consensus that the world needs to make their choices and make them coherently with agreement. It's not going to work if only the people who take this course understand the models. It's our obligation, your obligation, to take what we learn about models of vaccine costs and vaccine consequences and share it as widely as we can with stakeholders. Now, we said the second goal of the course is quantification. We want to measure things in numbers. And as economists, one of the numbers that matters most to us is the cost of doing things. And as I said, if you do thing X, you cannot do thing Y. I'm here giving this lecture, and I can't go water skiing at the same time. I don't know how to water ski. That's another problem. But we have to track the monetary costs, and we have to track those opportunity costs, the things we have to give up in order to get the world vaccinated. We want to pay attention once we know that there is a cost, there is somebody's money or somebody's time and opportunity being sacrificed. Who is that? Who is giving up those costs? And where are they on the planet? Are they in rich countries, poor countries? Is it from the supply side, the demand side? Is it the government's money, or is it a citizen's money? Who's actually going to bear that? Because the more we know about who's bearing the costs, the more we can find the obstacles and ease the bottlenecks. Another very important part of coherence and cohesive choices is knowing what the benefits are. We know that there's differential benefit across groups of people in the world. People who are highly exposed to this disease benefit more from a vaccine. People who are more likely to die from this vaccine benefit more. So these differential benefits in vaccine are job number one. But there's differential access. There are people who are very easy to reach with vaccine. There are people who want the vaccine so much they will climb over mountains and climb over rivers and streams in order to get the vaccine. And there are people who will run away from it. And we need to see that and anticipate that. And there are differences in motivation for why one would or would fail to want the vaccine. These motivations are complex, and the more we understand them, the better we can do. So there is a science of costing, and we will spend Unit 2 of this course going over the procedures where we identify the relevant costs. Not every cost, but the costs that matter to us. We'll develop a plan to measure the costs and who bears them, and we will make a list of the priority data needs, the things that we don't know and we absolutely must know right away in terms of finding out how much money we'll need to solve the problems of COVID-19 vaccination. And we want to do this right away. We want to get to applications as soon as we possibly can. So we will be applying the principles in this course. All students who complete the course will also complete a project where they will identify a critical choice in COVID-19 vaccine supply or demand or distribution or politics. They will design an achievable project to inform this vaccine choice and propose a work plan in order to produce the needed information. Let me just say a little bit about how those student projects will play out. Student projects need to be relevant to the very short term. These are relevant to choices about COVID-19 vaccine policy that we will need to execute within the next 12 months. The projects themselves need to be small, achievable in 1 or 2 months at the most. If you're going to execute the project in January, you should be finished by February because the vaccine is coming. It's coming early in 2021 as far as we can tell. We want you to apply the methods that we will teach you in costing, economic evaluation, and data gathering. And so here are some examples of things that students in this class should be able to do at the end of the class. There will be a need to reallocate pieces of the cold chain. There will be the need to expand the cold chain. And we want our students to get down and start modeling those costs. What will it cost to reallocate or expand the cold chain? The vaccine tracking systems, the information systems, don't have a field for COVID-19 vaccine yet. What will it cost to retool them? What will it cost to improve how they track these new subgroups that will be receiving vaccine? We need to get those ready. We need the finances to retool those vaccine tracking systems. There are hesitant groups who have vaccine hesitancy for COVID-19 vaccine. We've not yet understood where they are, who they are, or how to reach them, but the time is now in order to plan to reach them. We cannot be chasing vaccine hesitancy 12 months from now. So there's an urgent need to find out what the bottlenecks are, find out the perceptions and the problems with vaccine hesitancy as it manifests around the planet. It is different in every country and in every subgroup. There's an urgent need to find out what our resources and tools are. Who will be the COVID-19 vaccinators of next year? Where are they? How many do we have? Who else do we need? Another example is, what can we learn from the flu vaccine campaigns of now? What can we learn from the SIAs of last year for measles and other childhood vaccines? What do they teach us for the COVID campaigns that we're going to do? And it's not obviously all applicable, but if you've been on those campaigns, could you propose a project to learn whatever we can learn from those campaigns? So how are we going to put these projects into practice? Well, I'm giving you this lecture to start you thinking, and as soon as you finish this lecture, I want you to get out a piece of paper and start writing ideas of problems that you care about in COVID-19 space. By the end of Unit 1, which is just 2 to 3 weeks from now, we want you to write a Word document that's only 1 page long with at least 2 good ideas. That means you get about 100 to 200 words to say, this is my good idea. 2 good ideas. We want you to submit them to us, and we will give you comments on their feasibility, their salience, their impact, and ideas on how to carry forward. In Step 2, during the second phase of the course, we will expect you to expand one of your 2 good ideas into a 2-page work plan. What will you do? What are the steps that you'll take in order to make the model, collect the data, analyze the data, and how will you share it with the people for whom this project matters? And again, we want to discuss that with you and troubleshoot it with you so that it has the highest chance of success. At the end, we want to see a 5-page proposal or a 10-slide PowerPoint presentation that you can share with us and your fellow students. If it's at all possible for you to work with a partner or several partners, if you're coming from a unit where you are tasked to work on these problems together, please work in groups. We want you to work in groups if that's your work style. But if you're all isolated alone and sheltering in place, then we'll work with you too as an individual. We'll have time for questions during our interactive sessions, but for now, that's the start of our goals and how we're going to go through the goals in the course. So thank you very much for listening to part A, and in the next section we'll go through details about the emerging and rapidly changing COVID-19 vaccine landscape. Hello, this is David Bishai. I'm back for section B of our lecture on an introduction to the course in vaccine economics for COVID-19. In this section, we'll be covering the COVID-19 vaccine supply landscape. What's coming in the supply side of vaccine for COVID-19? Let's start with the obvious, which is the reasons we're having a vaccine is trying to reach herd immunity. The epidemiology of this disease is such that it infects so many people that in order to achieve herd immunity, we require 60 to 70% of a population to acquire immunity. They can acquire immunity by getting sick and recovering, which is the undesirable way. Much preferable that we achieve 60 to 70% immunity through a vaccine. Vaccines that we expect to have will not be helpful for a patient who has recovered from COVID-19, as far as we can understand right now. There are vaccines out there that are not for immunity. All they do is help the body fight a disease, but they will not protect somebody from getting a disease. And there may eventually be COVID-19 vaccines that really are not helpful so much for herd immunity, but help people survive a case of disease. We're not really discussing those vaccines, those anti-severity vaccines in the course. We're really discussing vaccines that are going to be taken as a product to prevent somebody from getting disease because they have antibodies against that antigen against that disease. We are expecting the approved vaccines, according to the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, and many other regulating bodies are following this lead, that they will only approve a vaccine that meets a standard of 50% effective when it's being compared against the placebo. So the FDA standards say that a vaccine has to be 50% effective compared to doing nothing at all. So if in an unvaccinated population of 1,000 we see 100 cases of COVID-19, in the vaccinated population of 1,000 we would have to see 50 people get disease. So we have to see a 50% lower attack rate of disease in the vaccinated population compared to the placebo. Let's go over the basic fundamentals of vaccine trials. Vaccine trials have a large preclinical phase where scientists simply study the chemistry of vaccine candidates. They'll give them to animals sometimes, but they won't give them to humans unless they're in a vaccine clinical trial. There are 3 kinds of clinical trials that I want to describe today. The phase 1 trial is a safety trial to ask the question, is this vaccine candidate safe and at what doses? And those trials usually have very small numbers, about 10 to 20 human beings. They're expensive because we have to produce this product. We have to get it to the stage where we can do the safety trial. And the estimates out there are that to finish a phase 1 trial of a product is going to take at least $4 million per vaccine candidate. That's not just 10 people getting a shot, that's getting the shots out there to candidacy and then giving them to 10 to 20 people to establish safety and dosage. If a candidate is successful at phase 1, it's moved on into phase 2, into what's called an expanded trial. And here the question is, what's the variability across 100 to 200 human beings? Is there a subgroup that's really responding? Is there a group that gets no benefit at all? And these trials, because they have so many more human volunteers, are going to cost more, and they're generally about $13 million or so per expanded trial. In phase 3, this is an efficacy trial, and that asks the question, is this product more effective than a placebo in tens of thousands of human beings? Now, in COVID-19 vaccine, in the US-based trials, the minimum size of these is 30,000. It's harder to see that a vaccine is efficacious than it is to see that a therapeutic is efficacious. Many people never get exposed to COVID-19 virus, and so they enter the trial and nothing happens. For these phase 3 trials, the minimum cost is $20 million, and those costs go much, much higher once we need to enroll many, many more tens of thousands of human beings. Now, the odds of failure are the very highest in phase 1. Many candidates come into phase 1 and then fail. Their side effect odds of failure are a little bit less in phase 2. Odds of failure are a little bit less in phase 3. This screening, this loss of products, is such that only 6% of potential vaccine candidates that start up in preclinical make it through successfully through phase 1, 2, and 3 and make it to the market. Because of all of these failures, the R&D cost of discovering one new profitable vaccine is up around $1 billion. It can be lower if we have a knockoff vaccine where we kind of know that the antigen is out there, we know how to make it, and we're simply applying a new technology. It's going to be less than $1 billion. But for COVID-19, brand new antigen, brand new technologies, the odds are that it's going to cost a lot more to simply come out of the trials with a successful vaccine. Miraculously, and I think it is a miracle, we only got the genetic code for the SARS-CoV-2 virus in January of 2020, and we already have over 100 vaccine candidates. This is unbelievable rapid progress. 170 candidates are currently in preclinical. This is as of October 2020, and this is changing every week. So I'm sorry that you're watching this after October, if you are, because this has been outdated. We have about 44 candidates in clinical trials as of October in the US and Europe and China. We have in Russia a vaccine that has been approved but that has not completed phase 3 trials, and I've just learned that China also has approved a vaccine for human use in the market, even though phase 3 trials have not been completed. The U.S. currently, in October 2020, has 4 products in phase 3 trials, and I'll be going over them just a little bit. But they're Johnson & Johnson, Moderna, Oxford, and the Pfizer vaccine. I want to go through a little bit more about them, and if you have access to the PowerPoint version of these slides, the word examples is a hyperlink to a New York Times repository of up-to-the-minute information on vaccine candidates. So if you want to see the up-to-the-minute data on what's happening in the vaccine trials, please click on that hyperlink. In phase 3, we have the Moderna vaccine. It has received $1.5 billion of funding from the U.S. government, and in exchange, Moderna has promised 100 million doses to the U.S. government. It's using a technology based on messenger RNA, which is a brand new technology that has never ever been used before to make human vaccines. There's also an mRNA vaccine made by Pfizer that has attracted nearly $2 billion worth of funding by the U.S. government, and there are 100 million doses promised to the U.S. government if that's successful. Johnson & Johnson has attracted $1 billion for an adenovirus vector vaccine, promising 100 million doses. The AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine has achieved $1.2 billion of government finances for an adenovirus vaccine. The Novavax vaccine has just gone into trials just a few days ago for $1.6 billion of U.S. government funding from Operation Warp Speed, and they promise 100 million doses. This will be a protein adjuvant vaccine. Still in phase 1 and 2, they're doing both phase 1 and 2 together, is a GlaxoSmithKline vaccine together with Sanofi. And they've been achieving $2 billion of upfront funding from the U.S. government. A couple of things to say is that the mRNA vaccines, especially the Moderna vaccine, it's being tried out with 2 doses, and the trial vaccine requires storage in negative 80 degrees Celsius freezers. So very few places in the world have access to negative 80 degree freezers. This is a problem that has yet to be solved as Moderna works to find a way to keep their product thermostable. You're seeing a lot of money in the finances column. If you look at that column, you're looking at almost $10 billion of taxpayer money that is being spent on investment, on not just let's pay you to do the trials and recruit the volunteers and write down the outcomes, but money that's also being spent to go straight to building factories and hiring workers to make the product. Many of these vaccines have already gone into production as a gamble, as a bet that the trial will succeed, and the company, because it's using taxpayer money, if the trial fails, the taxpayers' money is at risk, and that's just wasted if the vaccine trial doesn't work. But as a taxpayer, the taxpayer says, it's worth the gamble. I want those production capacity being built. I don't have a year to wait for you to build the factory to produce the vaccine products. So these investments are for preclinical as well as clinical trials, and the financing is going directly into preventing manufacturing bottlenecks. Typically, a pharmaceutical company is going to discover the product first, gradually launch into the market, gradually watch demand build up, and then build more and more plants and capacity. With COVID-19 vaccine, that's not happening. We are building the plant capacity now. We're buying automated filling machines, training factory workers, putting in place the ingredients supply networks of the proto-molecules and the vials and the syringes that are going to be required if these vaccine trials are successful. So that's coming in the supply landscape. And I've only covered just a little bit of it. There are many, many other vaccines that are in production and in clinical trials that I haven't described. And if you want to see more about that, you can click on the hyperlink. Now, in terms of how are we generating all of this money, where is this investment coming from? I mentioned that the American government is coming up with some, but there are advanced market commitments coming from the global world, the global marketplace. The Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, called CEPI, has joined forces with Gavi, which is the Vaccine Alliance, and they started something called COVAX in the year 2020. What COVAX does, and COVAX just started in April of this year, what COVAX does is it gathers money from many, many countries that have smaller economies, and they now have the ability to pool their money. They grab their money together and they all put it into a common fund in order to do what the U.S. government is doing for its own sake. So COVAX is planning to raise $16 billion over 18 months in order to secure access to 2 billion doses of vaccine. So just what you saw the U.S. doing, COVAX is doing for the world. COVAX will have self-financing members who will pay in, and they'll all get a guarantee of enough vaccine for 20% of their population. If they pay in, they'll get a guaranteed output of vaccine. In addition to the self-financing members, there are also 92 low-income countries eligible to be in on a fund of $2 billion. The donors are putting in money for those low-income countries, and just this week the World Bank is announcing it also is helping low-income countries have money around to wave in the face of vaccine suppliers, because no one is safe until everyone is safe. There's no way a country can say, well, we're just going to put a big bubble over our country and we'll just hide until this pandemic is over. There really is a common planetary need to vaccinate the planet. And so the low-income countries will have donor money available as well as their own money coming to incentivize the production of vaccine with advanced market commitments. So I mentioned that the U.S. government has put up $10 billion. I've shown you some of what their investments have been. This initiative of the U.S. government is called Operation Warp Speed. They already regret using the word warp because warp has a negative connotation. Well, if you're warping speed, aren't you cutting corners in safety? Are you cutting corners in the trial? Are you so focused on speed? And the U.S. government officials are working hard to correct that perception. But this is $10 billion that's being put into the pharmaceutical companies as a contract in exchange for guaranteed doses. Now, the U.S. politicians are politicians. They have to run for office, and they have voters who will punish them if they appear to do something that the voters don't like. So many U.S. politicians, especially before the 2020 election, have it in their mind that they will use their vaccines to allocate to America first. There are many in the U.S. who have put forth the defensible idea that the U.S. should allocate 10% of its vaccine stock to give out to low and middle income countries as an investment in its own selfish need to be protected, as well as its commitment to solidarity with the planet. So even though the politicians don't always get solidarity, there are many Americans that do believe in it, and they will be going to vote in the coming election. As of now, the USA has not put any money into the COVAX facility. The National Academy of Sciences has unanimously recommended that the U.S. should join and put money into COVAX so that these advanced market commitment funds have enough money. So that's the supply. How are we going to discover it? How are we going to get warehouses full of hundreds of millions and billions of vials of doses? So all of this money, these tens of billions that you see on this slide, will result in a warehouse full of vaccine, but not a single person will get immune at the end of this expenditure of $10 billion. We simply get a product that works. The next problem is that supply ends when the transport plane lands with vaccine for the people in your town. So yay, we now have 10 million doses of a safe and effective COVID-19 vaccine sitting at the airport. Now what? So supply on this global landscape says, make the vaccine, put it on an airplane, get it to the airport, and then walk away. You're done. But you're not done. Now it's up to you and me and the rest of us to move that vaccine out of the airport and keep supplying it down supply chains. And now we have a lot of choices to make. We've talked a little bit about how do we produce it, how do we discover it choices. Most of our problem is about supply choices in country. We have to decide when to use private sector workers in COVID-19 vaccine delivery. Maybe there's a reason to use them, maybe there's a reason not to use them. We have to understand what's needed in these new cold chains that have yet to be constructed to accommodate COVID-19 vaccine. Lots of choices in how to design these. We have to make choices in how to track coverage with COVID-19 vaccine. How do we communicate? How do we engage communities in understanding this new vaccine? There's a new workforce that's needed. We have to reallocate old workers and get them trained into how to use this vaccine. We need to recruit new workers as well. So these supply choices are going to require not global financing, but local financing. It's going to cost resources to introduce this new COVID-19 vaccine or vaccines into any country and put it into the supply chain. So being effective advocates means knowing what these costs will be and who will bear them, and describing ways to get those costs to be borne fairly. We also have many choices about who to vaccinate in order to get the most benefit from these COVID-19 vaccine supplies. So we have delivery choices that have to be made. So the supply side landscape, on a positive note, there are many possible candidates. It's looking good. We're looking to see these trials wrap up as soon as the next few months go by, maybe by the end of 2020. And then we'll have country-based supply problems that also need to be solved, and we need to get ready now to solve them. So I look forward to talking to you more about the demand side of the COVID-19 vaccine landscape. Hello, this is David Bishai, and I'm here to present Section C of our lecture on the Introduction to COVID-19 Vaccine Economics. And in this section, we're going to cover the demand for the COVID-19 vaccine and describe what we know about it. The demand for COVID-19 vaccine measures the interest of the world in a safe and effective vaccine. It's very high, but it's very variable. The benefits of being personally vaccinated differ from person to person and group to group. We have highly vulnerable groups who have the most to gain personally because of their high mortality if they do acquire COVID-19 disease. There are people who have 2 or more comorbidities, and they are at the highest risk. People with cancer, kidney disease, COPD, obesity, heart disease, heart failure, or type 2 diabetes. People with 2 of these conditions have even worse outcomes than people without them. It's not enough just to be old. Older people are at risk, but it's even worse to be old with these comorbidities. We also see people who have high exposure rates. Even with a low risk of dying, if more and more people in an exposure group get disease, those low chances of dying add up to lots and lots of diseases. So we know that frontline health workers have high rates of exposure to people with the SARS-CoV-2 virus, and clinical workers in hospitals, clinics, and long-term care facilities, as well as everybody else around them, the non-clinical workers, those who offer janitor services and food supplies and assistants and clerks. If they're in the airspace of a COVID-19 patient, they're also getting highly exposed. And we do our best with personal protective devices, but the exposures are still there. In the same category are the people who are outside of clinics, out in people's lives. These emergency medical personnel, police and firefighters have very high exposure rates. Moving down a little bit in benefit levels, we think that just older people, even healthy older people, can be at high risk, especially older adults who are living in group living, in assisted living communities. The rapidity of movement of the virus in those settings has put them at higher risk. Moving down the level, school teachers, school staff, people in daycare seem to have a high risk of being exposed. And there are many other workers who don't have a super high risk of exposure or a super high mortality rate, but there are people who are essential for society to function. People who work in the food industry to grow our food and move it to us. People who supply energy to us, working in mines and in extractive industries to keeping the economies running. They are often in settings where they need to be healthy and protected. So we have a lot of categories of people who we want to get vaccinated, who they themselves want to get vaccinated, and those vary. Down at the bottom are people who are just around, who don't feel a high risk of disease and are not highly exposed to disease, but they need to get vaccinated in order to get our numbers up to 60 to 70% for herd immunity. Looking through, there's not a global survey. There are very few national surveys of vaccine hesitancy. University of Washington researchers looked at social media analytics to try to infer what attitudes were about COVID-19 vaccine hesitancy. People posting things about COVID-19 vaccine that had negative adjectives on it. And they were able to make an estimate that's very wide. Vaccine hesitancy ranges anywhere from 30 to 85%. in various subgroups around the world. On average, in the USA, for instance, it's rated at 60%. And this is subject to revision. Right now, there is no vaccine to be hesitant about, and nothing is known about the final safety and efficacy. Nothing is known about how that will be communicated. Will it be a speech by some not trusted politician that might change those numbers, or will it be a speech by a trusted scientist? We don't know. But we know that it will not be a 100% trusted vaccine. We will know that there will be many gaps in people who are willing to accept this vaccine right now. Traditionally, if you're sitting in this course, you have probably come at vaccines with the view that vaccines are for children, because they are. Children are born with susceptibility to many of the diseases that adults have already encountered. So routine vaccine delivery systems have had a focus on childhood vaccinations. We've seen the flexibility of our vaccine delivery systems to reach adults, to reach new populations, as they've done in the H1N1 pandemic and in the Ebola pandemic. So there's a little bit of a difference, is that now with COVID-19, those traditional child-focused vaccine systems have to be safe and not spread COVID-19. If we're going to do an SIA, we can't do our SIAs the same old way. SIA stands for Supplemental Immunization Activity. In other words, a campaign to go out to a community and say, from Monday through Friday, we're going to be in the public square vaccinating everybody who shows up. You can't do that anymore without modification. Even those traditional vaccine delivery systems have had backlogs and failing coverage because of the lockdowns and the social distancing and parents' own hesitation to bring their child out into a public healthcare setting. So the reaching people problem is quite large, both from their side of the demand and our ability to get to them and overcome their hesitancy. Now, building trust has become a problem because there are many polarizing politicians who've tied the vaccine to their regime and to nationalism. And there are worries now about safety because of the accelerated development. They're worried about safety because you have to go out of your house and to a public setting in order to get vaccinated. So this brings up, how do people get trust? They get trust by stories. They get trust by science and data, but I think there's a whole lot more individuals that don't read the Lancet and the New England Journal to trust a vaccine, but they hear a story. They hear so-and-so that they know got the vaccine and they were fine with it or they weren't fine with it. The idea of the brand of the vaccine, that the vaccine was endorsed by such and such an agency that was trusted, that the Mayo Clinic or Johns Hopkins University endorse the vaccine, gives it a brand, and people are motivated in order to achieve many, many other goals besides acquiring immunity. We need to tie vaccine motivations to other human motivations. So when we're thinking about the complex link between what we have in our hand, which is money, and what we want to achieve, which is trust, there is a long circuitous passageway. The money that we have needs to somehow go into building relationships with people who need to trust the vaccine. These relationships are with civil society leaders, with religious leaders, with local political leaders who now get to know a little bit more about the vaccine. They need to feel heard. Their concerns need to be heard. You don't have them say, well, I'm worried that the vaccine will give me side effects. You don't just say, you're wrong, they won't. You say, tell me why you're worried the vaccine gives you side effects. I can see why you would feel that way. Let's talk about what we know about the science and what has happened in the trials. That the questions are valid, that the people asking them have a reason to ask them, and we need to deploy existing tools of comprehensive primary health care. These 4 words here on the slide mean not just primary care of doctors and nurses, they mean the comprehensive primary health care such as we heard about in the Alma Ata Declaration in 1978, where communities around the world actually went through building networks of people across multiple sectors, not just clinics, but schools and agricultural activities and women's groups and men's groups, who would be in conversation about how they could become healthier. These chains exist all around the world. There are village health committees all around the world. There are armies of community health workers that have been delivering this community-facing, grassroots primary healthcare product in many countries around the world. This is tied to the public health departments of the world. These are tools that we have, and they need to be deployed right now. This is not a time to say, well, we won't use our boots on the ground. We're simply going to write a couple of radio ads and beam them out of the Capitol, and that'll fix it. That's a great idea, to beam radio ads. It's just that we have other tools to use to do the work of building relationships. We also have money, and I'm not ruling out that many of you will find that cash transfers are a useful tool here. Another candidate tool that is being put out, and we're having increasing attention to it, is a mandate. And a mandate is a law or a rule that says if you don't get vaccinated, something will happen to you. You will lose a privilege, you will pay a fine, you will lose a freedom. These mandates are only good if they can be observed and enforced, and if they feel like they're coming from the people. If the people feel like they've been oppressed by an alien oppressor, the mandates would be an absolute disaster of people rebelling and starting political movements to overturn the mandate. So we require the people to say, we agree. The majority says that we need the mandate because we all want COVID-19 to go away. It is a threat to humanity. So there is a need to start that political movement if that's the destination, if the destination is indeed a mandate. This is not a band-aid and simply saying to a dictator who is not trusted, you should just do a mandate. That'll solve it. Might not be such a great idea. We will face the demand side problem of fairness because there will be a shortage. We will not have enough vaccine for everybody. Under the COVAX facility coming out of Gavi, the rules are that you're guaranteed enough for 20% of your population by the end of 2021. Definitely not going to have enough vaccine in month 1. Probably not going to have enough vaccine for everybody who needs it in month 12. So it might take a year. We might be into 2022 when we have enough for everybody. And so there comes the problem of, is it fair? So we need to do this in phases. And in phase 1, we need to start a consensus about who are the highest priorities. Most countries are coming to believe that it should be the healthcare workers and the high comorbidity patients in phase 1, but that needs to get out. People need to get it and understand why that is. Otherwise, they'll say, well, why not me? Well, why not me? That's most foremost on everybody's mind. But after phase 1, there's all sorts of phase 2 priorities that have to be worked out with a local consensus. There's a geographical problem. There are places that differ in their ease of reaching. And it's unclear epidemiologically whether you should tackle all places at once or tackle the easy places first. Supposing we have a difficult to reach area and an easy to reach area. In our difficult to reach area, we have 1 million people in a remote jungle, and they're having a civil war right now. And if you try to go near them with a vaccine, you could be shot, and health workers might not have security. Because of the need for security, it costs $100 per dose to go into the remote jungle and deliver this vaccine. And these 1 million people have as much high risk of COVID-19. They're human beings, they have human rights. Most of them are civilians, not combatants, so there they are. It's expensive to reach them. On the other hand, we have 10 million people living in a city with lots of roads, and it's pretty easy to reach them, and I can vaccinate each one at $10 per dose. So we have a problem of fairness. There's no way to make this go away. We do have limited budgets, even though some billionaires have no trouble coming up with another 100 million. Most countries don't, and the World Bank doesn't. The World Bank is hard-pressed to come up with another 100 million. So even though we wish we could snap our fingers and come up with another 100 million, we have what's called an equity efficiency trade-off. It is most efficient to go to the easy-to-reach area in April of next year and quite quickly use our 100 million to give benefits to 10 million people under an ethics of doing the most good for the least money. The easy-to-reach area wins. On the other hand, equity and fairness says you can't leave those million people in the remote jungle completely unprotected. Don't they have rights? It's not fair that just because it's more expensive to reach them that they're put at the bottom of the list. Is there a compromise? Would it be fair to spend a little bit of money for the million people and vaccinate 10% of the million and 50% of the 10 million? I can't solve that question for you. Only the place with that problem needs to start engaging in a public and transparent dialogue about that difficult problem. Having it done behind closed doors, or certainly having it done by a Johns Hopkins professor in a Zoom lecture, is not the way to do it. I'm simply flagging to you that there are these choices that we hope to give you some cost analysis tools to begin to shed light on. You won't be able to solve a trade-off like this simply with economics. Economics can't solve it. There's so many ethical principles and principles of who's included in the decision that have to be put into practice. So on the demand side, we have a lot of concerns about who we will prioritize, how we will reach those with vaccine hesitancy, and how we will keep our commitments to fairness despite a lack of all of the resources that we wish we always had. So that's it for our section on demand. I'd like to thank you for listening, and I'll come back with you in section D of this lecture on an introduction to COVID-19 vaccine economics. This is Professor David Bishai, and I'm here to deliver section D of our lecture on COVID-19 vaccine economics. This is the part of the lecture where we go over applications and possible problems that could make a difference in the near-term future. There are lots and lots of choices out there, and we need to focus. When we're making a choice, it's usually a do A or do B choice. And if it's obvious, we don't need an economist to show up and tell us anything. So we want to focus our efforts on things that are not obvious. We also want to have available data on the costs and consequences of choice A and choice B. We should have access to that data. And finally, we should have stakeholders that say, I need to be informed about this choice. I have that choice, and your data and your analysis will help me. We want to engage those stakeholders as early as possible in our work as economists. Tell them we're working on the problem before we're finished solving the problem. So that way they'll be tuned in to the results of our work. We need to be fast. We need speed. People need answers right away, and we want to have cost and impact models that are available quite soon. So here's an example of something that I think would be doable and useful in the near-term future. The question is, what is it going to cost to add COVID-19 to the cold chain? Obviously, it's hard to solve that now, and right now we don't know the final vaccine candidate that's going to be successful in the phase 3 trial. We don't know how it will be packaged. We don't know how many vials will be in a container and so on. But that's okay. We can get ready even now by taking stock of what our current cold chain costs and where the openings are. So in this case, one would go through certainly looking up current data on the square meters of current capacity of the cold chain, current data on how much that cold chain is being utilized throughout the system, not just in the central stores, but at the peripheral and facility stores. We want to know the current cost to maintain a square meter and to add on a square meter. What financing will we need in order to expand the refrigerated cold chain? Once we have those steps 1 through step 3 where we know what we have, we could produce models of what it might take. We would bracket our assumptions by saying, okay, this is what would happen if it's large volumes of single-dose vials. This was what would be required if we need freezer space. This is what would be required if we need refrigeration space. If we have bracketed estimates, the models could be ready to go once we finally understand what's coming out of the phase 3 trials, and we would be ready to hit the ground with the expanded cold chain. Another example would be to model how to adapt campaigns and supplemental immunization activities, or SIAs, to be adapted into the COVID-19 framework. We need to make models of the new features required to protect the health workers and the patients in this new campaign. What will we need for masks and gowns? How will we keep the facilities sanitary? How will we communicate safety protocols? How can we supervise the protocols? And how can we pilot test the new protocols to work them out? In this course, we'll give you some ideas of the unit costs for some of these devices and personnel. And that, I think, could be helpful for you to begin going to your local settings to experiment and to do key informant interviews to model what would be required for an outreach or an SIA, or even if you think you could pull it off safely at all. So once we have the ingredients of what we need, and we have unit costs of what it costs to purchase a mask, what it costs to sanitize the facility, we just simply multiply the cost times these numbers of units. It's a multiplicative model that could be used, and you could start to produce the prototype of that even now. Final example is adding COVID-19 to a vaccine information system. One would have to talk to the current vendors that are being used to maintain the vaccine information system. You would interview those VIS workers about VIS, meaning Vaccine Information System. You would ask them, what would it cost your software developers to add modules for COVID-19 vaccine tracking? What have been the current performance gaps that COVID-19 tracking might worsen? Are we getting missing data? And where are we getting missing data? How can we close those gaps in the vaccine information system? We could make a model of the ingredients required for this upgrade and then apply the unit cost to the model. So what we're going to do in this course, during Unit 1, we'll be asking you to brainstorm. And brainstorms are easy. There's no wrong answer in a brainstorm. We want you to get excited about what you think you'll need to know in order to make the right choices in COVID-19 vaccine. And it would be fine if you simply use these 3 examples I've given you or others that I mentioned, but it would be even better if you come up with the decision making that the policymakers around you are motivated by. What is on their desk? What do they need to know, and when do they need to know it? During Unit 1, we'll be asking for 200 words on what is the choice problem. Who is the decider in this choice problem? Is it the Minister of Health? Is it a doctor? Is it a community health worker? Who is the decider? What do they need to know in order to make the informed decision? Last few issues are, will you be able to help them? How feasible will it be for you to find out the things they need to know? Can you interview them using the methods we teach you in costing to identify their ingredients? What are the tools that they need, and how feasible will it be for you to find out what they need, and where will you get your data from? So what's happening as you form these student projects? In Unit 1, we will be going further in introducing the principles of vaccine economics. We're going to go over basic choices. What's going on in a choice? What are costs? What is supply? What is demand? And we'll be going over models of how those things apply to new vaccine introduction in general, as well as especially for COVID-19. We'll talk about some of the big financing questions that countries are facing in COVID-19 vaccine financing to give you even more of a framework and a landscape for how your own student projects can be tied to what's important. In Unit 2, we will be going through, on the academic side, in many methods of acquiring cost data and modeling cost data. And for those who are in the policy track, you'll be taught how to use data from a costing study and how to understand it and deploy it. Unit 3 builds on Unit 2. In Unit 3, we'll go through economic evaluation. We'll go through the scope of an economic evaluation, which includes not just costs, but the health outcomes. This is cost and outcomes, cost and benefits, costs and effectiveness. And we'll take you all the way through the skills required to make a decision tree that combines all of the costs and effects into one unit called the incremental cost effectiveness ratio. And in Unit 4, we'll be going over student projects with you. How can we make your student projects and your costing and cost effectiveness models more useful and more beneficial to the people whose lives depend on them? So, in summary, in this lecture, what have we covered? The good news is that it really does look like COVID-19 vaccines are coming, and many of them are in phase 3 trials that should be ending within the next 2, 3, 4, 5 months. Hopefully, very confidently, we will have vaccines that have safety and efficacy. We'll have to make some hard choices because we will not have enough of them for several months. We want to make choices that deliver the most benefit for the least cost, but that benefit might include the benefit of fairness. Not just the benefit of numbers of people. There might be people who have a claim on this vaccine that is special, and we have to be open to that. There will be supply-side efforts focusing mostly, and the money right now is mostly on what it should be on, which is discovering it and producing it. But the next question is our question and your question. After it's discovered, after it lands at the airport, what do we do after the airplane lands? How do we make good supply choices? How do we support vaccine demand after we have local supply? Now, we're going to have shortages. We're going to have people who need to be included in solving the shortages, and they're going to want to feel like their voice was heard. Their voice should be heard in order to achieve the goals of fairness and transparency. We need to build that structure right now, and it's our collective job to raise to that challenge. So this is probably not an ordinary economics class. It's a class where we're open to your own participation as well as being informed by other disciplines than economics. So I hope it's useful to you, and I look forward to continuing this journey with you all the way to the end to see your student projects. Thank you. Thank you.